Your Excellencies, dear participants, I have the pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research and our co-organizer, the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. My name is Rom Nicolin, and I'm an associate researcher with UNIDIR, and I will be your moderator for this event. This is the first of a three-part webinar series, which is made possible by the generous financial support by Germany. The webinars will aid stakeholders with the substantive preparations for 3 issue areas, which are part of the mandate of the open-ended technical expert group that will meet next June in New York. Now, this first webinar today provides participants with an overview over the marking, record keeping, and tracing challenges posed by polymer and modular small arms component. The second webinar, taking place in December, will deal with craft production and 3D printing, and the third one in February next year, with opportunities of technology or small arms control. And with the webinars, we aim to share the current state of knowledge on these issues, and we will publish a primer next year and spring, hopefully, summarizing the information shared in the webinars. Now we have 90 minutes for this webinar. After the opening remarks, we will hear from an expert panel about the challenges posed by polymer and modular small arms component and potential avenues that the expert group could consider to address them. Afterwards, we will have a Q&A session as time permits. You will hopefully notice the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and please feel free to submit your questions at any point of the webinar, so already during the presentations if you have any, and we will pick up on them in the Q&A segment. Now, with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our 2 speakers providing the opening remarks for this webinar. And we are joined by Dr. Benedikt Zanker, Head of Division on Conventional Disarmament and Arms Control at the German Federal Foreign Office, and Mr. Ivor Fang, Head of the Conventional Arms Branch of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. Mr. Zanker, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. For us at the Federal Foreign Office, supporting international efforts to prevent or at least reduce the illicit proliferation of small arms, light weapons and ammunition is a key policy priority. Indeed, we spend most of the money available for us to fund projects in this area. And every year we have at our disposal so far at least between 10 and 15 million euros. And as I said, the large majority goes into SALW and ammunition projects. The main areas we concentrate in is to support efforts for capacity building of responsible authorities, to support regional approaches like the many roadmaps, which we welcome very much, but also policy development and strengthening of the key humanitarian arms control instruments. And UNIDIR and UNODA are our key partners in that, and we are very grateful for our Parliament's support that we can financially contribute. And last year, I think we combined had a contribution of 3 million for these both key players. Colleagues, the PoA and also the Global Framework on Ammunition, they stand out among humanitarian arms control instruments as enjoying universal support. But in order to continue to address the challenges of illicit flows of small arms and light weapons effectively, the PoA has to address challenges that have arisen since the PoA came into existence. And this is why, as we all know, in 2024, the RevCon consensually decided to establish an open-ended technical working group on these developments. As most recently laid out in the SG report on small arms and light weapons, illicitly manufactured, craft-produced, and 3D printed small arms and light weapons are increasingly present, and they are fueling illicit markets, organized crime, and armed violence. The availability and use of polymer instead of metals, as well as modularity in design, are facilitating these developments. And this is a change to the parameters for illicit production, but also for marking on record keeping and tracing. At the same time, we all know that technological advancements and availability also are opening new opportunities. For example, laser engraving or metal inserts or high precision micromarking are promising developments to improve reliable marking and polymer and modular weapons. Given the complexity and technicality of these issues, the webinar series organized by UNIDIR and UNODA is as timely as it is essential in the preparation for next year's BSM and first session of the open-ended technical working group. And it is a privilege for my government to provide the financial means to make this workshop series possible. So before handing over to Ivor, let me just thank to everybody involved at UNIDIR and UNODA, both for the initiative, but also for the hard work that makes these series of workshops possible. I think it's especially a good idea to do this online, given that, at least in our case, and it will be the same with many member states, I believe, these issues are being followed often by diplomats and not experts. And so it's really important to have these prep series before. With that, I thank you very much, and I pass on to Ivor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon to participants joining us from around the world. On behalf of UNODA, the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, I am pleased to welcome you to the first webinar in our series on developments in small arms and light weapons manufacturing, technology, and design. Let me begin by thanking you, Benedict, for these opening remarks and by expressing our sincere appreciation to the government of Germany for its financial support, which has made this series a reality. I also thank our partners at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research for their close cooperation in organizing the webinars. And of course, a warm thanks to our speakers for sharing their expertise with us today. I could see Thierry on the screen, and I'm sure many of those experts who have helped us in the past will do so again today. A little over a year ago, at the fourth review conference on the program of action, all UN member states reaffirm that these instruments, that is the PoA and the ITI, are the main universal instruments for, and I quote, promoting peace, security, sustainable development, and reducing human suffering and socio-economic consequences caused by the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in all its aspects, unquote. When properly implemented, the PoA and the ITI can significantly reduce the threat of illicit small arms and light weapons. However, to remain effective, our arms control and weapons management practices must evolve and adapt to new developments and technologies, both the challenges and the opportunities that they also bring. The insight shared today and in the coming webinars will help inform global discussions and prepare the ground for a new mechanism under the program of action. The open-ended technical expert group on development in small arms and light weapons, manufacturing, technology, and design. The OETEG was established by the General Assembly in 2024 and will convene during the PoA biennial meetings of states in June 2026 and in 2028. The group will develop recommendations by consensus by 2028 or at the latest by the 5th PoA review conference in 2030 on tackling the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in light of developments in the manufacturing, technology, and design. In particular, polymer and modular weapons and firearms produced using 3D printing. Consultations with states on the modalities and the process of establishing this group will begin once a chair has been identified and appointed. In the meantime, substance generation is critical. For over a decade, the issues of both polymer frames and modular weapon systems have been raised as key concerns to weapons marking and to the effective implementation of the international tracing instrument. That is the focus of today's webinar. We are pleased to be joined by an expert panel who will help us better understand these issues and explore current practices and potential policy responses that would be captured in an insight report produced by UNIDIR, as Ruben has just spelled out. And I thank you all and encourage you to be engaged on these issues. And I look forward to also participating in this debate. I am pleased to officially declare this expert webinar series open. I look forward to a rich and insightful discussion. Let me now hand back the floor to you, Ruben, to moderate the upcoming panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivor. Thank you very much, Mr. Zanker, for these opening remarks. Ivor, I believe that you very succinctly summarized the mandate and the importance of the open-ended technical expert group. And it's precisely because of this mandate that covers polymer and modular components, 3D printing, and the opportunities of technologies for small arms control that we set the topic of the three-part webinar series as we have. I'd also like to echo what you both said and thank both Germany and UNODA for the close collaboration. And with that, please allow me to introduce our expert panel. With us are Paul Amoroso, consultant at the Small Arms Survey, Dr. Rachel Bolton-King, Associate Professor of Forensic Science at Nottingham Trent University, Thierry Jacobs, Independent Consultant for the Small Arms and Light Weapons Industry, and Denis Jacquemont, Arms Control, Disarmament and Non-Proliferation section of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium. Paul will introduce what polymer and modular small arms components are and provide an overview of the marking, record-keeping, and tracing problems that we generally encounter. And with that, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Can I confirm you're seeing the correct screen there?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be provided this opportunity to briefly discuss the issues surrounding both polymer and modular weapons and the challenges they present to their marking and associated tracing in line with the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and the associated international tracing instrument. A key reference used in this brief will also be the Modular Small Arms Implementation Compendium, which I will refer to as the Mosaic. The intent of my brief here is to inform you, the stakeholders within the diplomatic community, of the problems posed and potential solutions for the marking of polymer and modular small arms and light weapons. The tracing instrument tells us that the choice of methods for marking of small arms and light weapons is a national prerogative. States will ensure that whichever method is used, all marks required under this instrument are on an exposed surface, conspicuous without technical aids or tools, easily recognizable, readable, durable, and as far as technically possible, recoverable. The Mosaic outlines what it terms to be classical markings, which in addition to the characteristics already outlined, requires that the markings are on the frame of the receiver or other pressure-bearing components, have a minimum marking information from the manufacturer, and may also have proof markings or import markings also included. We'll now take a closer look at where markings need to be applied, with the receiver or frame already mentioned, and I've also mentioned the concept of pressure-bearing components. According to Mosaic, the receiver or frame is the most essential part of a weapon, and for legal purposes may be considered the small arm or light weapon itself. For the purpose of recording and tracing, the marking of a receiver or frame should be the main reference point for identifying a weapon, as you may have different components from different weapons mixed. If no marking is made on the frame or receiver, then an alternative reference point must be chosen. Mosaic also states marks should be applied to other pressure-bearing components, which are generally the tougher components that can sustain the pressure of marking itself. These include the barrel, the slide, the cylinder, the bolt, or the breech block. In summation, the receiver or frame is considered the most essential part of a weapon, and for legal reasons may be considered the small arm or light weapon itself. For accountancy and tracing, marking on the receiver or frame is the main identification point. Shown here is what may be considered good weapon marking on the frame of a German G36 rifle. It is noted that different components from different weapons can be assembled together, which is the principal issue posed when we are dealing with the marking of modular weapons. However, we will first examine the challenges posed in the appropriate marking of polymer weapons. Polymer firearm is a gun whose major structural components, such as the frame, grip, or stock, are made primarily from engineered plastic polymers, instead of traditional metals like steel or aluminium. Following improvements in material science, the development of new manufacturing methods, and the shift towards modularity, reliable polymer frame and polymer receiver firearms have become commonplace in both the civilian and military markets. Some of the most common polymers, both reinforced and otherwise, are named in the grey box on the top right of the screen. The first polymer firearm frame to be successfully marketed worldwide and well received by different user communities was the G17 model introduced by Glock in 1981. This is shown in image 1. Its success resulted in progressive transition to polymers, soon followed by other arms producers following suit. Shown in image 2 is an example of a Kevlar reinforced polymer 80% lower receiver for an AR-15. Other examples include the CZ Bren, shown in image 3, and the HK-36 of the German Bundeswehr standard service rifle, shown in figure 4. The focus of this webinar is on industrially manufactured small arms and light weapons, not craft-produced components. 3D printing of small arms, light weapons and components will be discussed in another webinar, as has been outlined. However, it is acknowledged that there is a grey area in that polymer components that are commercially and legally produced, not by small arms, light weapons manufacturers, can pose problems to tracing. Polymer firearms pose a unique challenge for marking and tracing. Unlike metal components, polymer parts, especially frames and receivers, allow serial numbers and other identifiers to be easily altered, defaced, or removed. This matters most when key structural components are made of polymer. For handguns, this is typically the frame, and for long guns, this is typically the receiver. When these are polymer-based, traditional marking methods become less reliable. While the issue has been recognized for some time, there is mounting evidence to suggest it is now less prevalent an issue than it would previously have been. Both the EU and the US ATF require that markings be placed on metal, either directly on a metal frame or receiver, or on a metal tag affixed to the firearm. Manufacturers appear to have adopted this practice consistently. That said, it remains unclear whether such good practices are being applied globally. Overall, polymer weapons can represent two main challenges to tracking and tracing efforts. Firstly, polymer components are more vulnerable to abrasion, heat, and chemical degradation compared to metal components. Such wear can result in polymer markings fading or being removed totally. This can be considered as unintentional degradation or loss of markings, which can subsequently hamper tracing efforts. Secondly, deliberate efforts to obscure or remove polymer markings are easier. This involves deliberate efforts to counter tracing efforts. Finally, so-called ghost guns crafted using unmarked polymer frames are often used in DIY or 3D printed firearms and involve deliberate efforts to prevent tracing. Again, this is not the focus of this webinar and will be covered in a preceding one. Ultimately, there is a grey zone of polymer components produced without markings that can pose tracing issues. The firearms industry has used various techniques to strengthen the durability and recoverability of polymer frame markings. These methods include the use of metal tags along with secondary, typically covert markings. However, metal tags can be easily removed if not deeply embedded in the firearm. As such, Mosaic states that the markings for weapons with frames made from non-metallic materials, such as polymers, should be applied to a metal plate permanently embedded in the firearm, in such a way that firstly, the plate cannot be easily removed, and secondly, removing the plate could destroy a portion of the frame. In the case of the Glock 19 weapon system shown on screen, it should be noted that the magazine, receiver, and several of its components are made from hard plastic. The serial number is located in 3 places. The first 2 locations are the barrel at the ejection port and also on the slide under the ejection port. Both of these markings are on metallic components of the weapon and are highlighted on the right of the screen. The third location of a serial number of this weapon is on the bottom of the polymer receiver towards the front, shown on the left of the screen. The serial number is engraved on the metal plate and embedded into the receiver. We will now move on to examine some of the challenges posed by modular weapons in terms of marking and tracing. The concept of modularity is simple. Each rifle has a core section considered to be upper or lower receiver, around which the user can switch most other parts to obtain different configurations depending on the user requirements. The term modular weapon is often erroneously associated with an image of a rifle surrounded by a multitude of accessories that enhance its performance or alter its appearance. In fact, modular weapons are quite different. To fully understand the difference, it's necessary to first distinguish clearly between accessory and component. Accessories are add-ons that enhance performance, usability, or ergonomics, but are not essential to the weapon functioning and include such items as optics, grips, slings, bipods, mounts, lights, laser sights, and holsters. Weapon accessories are typically unregulated as they do not affect ballistic signatures or core function. Components, sometimes referred to as parts, are core elements essential to the weapon's functioning and identity. Examples include barrel, receiver, bolt, breech, block, slide, cylinder, or suppressor. They are often serialized and regulated. When weapon components are swapped, it affects forensic traceability and legal status. A modular weapon can be broadly defined as a weapon with a core section, usually the receiver or the upper or lower section in the case of a split receiver weapon, around which all or almost all other major parts or components can be switched directly by the user. This allows them to obtain different configurations according to the user needs. There are 2 main approaches to modularity, depending on whether the caliber can be changed on the given weapon. In the case of full modularity, the same weapon can be used after changing relevant parts to fire more than one caliber of ammunition. This multi-caliber approach is therefore referred to as the common or universal receiver approach. A second possibility is the family approach, in which modularity is partial. The same model of firearm is produced in a family of different calibers. The caliber on a given weapon cannot be changed, but all other parts are modifiable and interchangeable. Such modular weapon systems are said to have partial modularity. To illustrate the challenges that fully modular weapon systems can present to standard tracing mechanisms, the following generic example is presented. Take a fully modular weapon with the following history. When manufactured, it has an original configuration of having a lower receiver configured for 7.62 calibered ammunition. Its lower receiver is stamped with a serial number of AB1234567. As such, it is registered as a 7.62 caliber battle rifle with serial number AB1234567. At some later date, it is reconfigured by the user swapping out its upper receiver, bolt and barrel, so it now fires a 5.56 round. The weapon is now a 5.56mm assault rifle with serial number AB1234567. An incident occurs involving this weapon. The weapon is recovered and it's recorded in the investigation log as a 5.56 assault rifle. The serial number on the lower receiver is traced and the records indicate a 7.62 battle rifle. We now have a weapon recovered that does not match the registered lower receiver. The implications of this include there is a forensic mismatch between the weapon as registered and the weapon recovered. There is confusion within the investigation of the incident and delays can occur. There is also the possibility that potential gaps in domestic legislation related to advances in weapon design and modularity, interchangeability of components, and the forensics implications can make investigation and subsequent prosecution quite challenging. In terms of illustrating the tracing challenges that can arise with partially modular weapons, the following example will be used. We are reminded that partial modular weapon systems maintain the same caliber across various configurations, but other components can be switched out, such as the upper receiver, bolts, barrels, firing pins for use in different roles. In this example, a weapon is involved in two incidents which are being investigated. In incident A, the user uses the factory-issued 18-inch barrel with polygonal rifling. It is involved in a second incident, but in this case, barrel has been swapped out for a 14.5-inch barrel with conventional rifling. Even though both fire a 5.56mm round, the forensics lab may not link the bullets to the same weapon due to differing rifle markings and ballistic profiles. This can lead to the following implications for tracing. If the serialized lower receiver is recovered, investigators may still struggle to link the weapon to the two incidents unless the barrel history is documented. If only projectiles or casings are recovered and no weapon, forensics linkage may fail if barrel swaps are not accounted for. This can create a false negative risk in ballistic matching systems like integrated ballistic identification systems. In summation, three of the major implications of modularity on weapons tracing are: marking locations matter, as if the registered serial number is not on the weapon when it is being investigated, it can undermine traceability. Modularity enables obfuscation by enabling criminals or traffickers to reconfigure weapons to avoid detection or forensic linkage. Forensic complexity can arise as ballistic matching, tool mark analysis, and digital tracing becomes harder when components are not fixed to a single weapon identity. Three operational responses to modular weapon tracing that can be implemented now include: investigators must treat modular weapons as composite systems, not unitary objects. Registry systems may need to evolve to track serialized components beyond the lower receiver. Training for forensic examiners should encompass modularity awareness analysis, especially in post-conflict or transnational investigations. That concludes my brief. I will now hand back to Ruben, and I'm happy to take questions later as the time is available, or I'm contactable as required with the emails on screen. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this overview of the key items and the key terms that we're talking about. And I think you make it quite clear that on paper, marking seems quite straightforward. You put a unique serial number on a firearm, but then in practice, we are dealing with a lot more complexities, and there's certain discrepancies between the types of small arms and light weapons that the program of action and the ITI originally considered, which are steel, which are weapons manufactured of steel or aluminum, and which are in one configuration. And so there's a certain mismatch, which really leads us to the discussion today. Now, next, I would love to turn over the floor to Rachel Bolton-King for a deep dive into the problems of polymer components from a law enforcement perspective. And so with that, the floor is yours.
Apologies, I was just trying to unmute myself there. Thank you so much for having me to share this with you today. So I'd like to firstly recap on a little bit of what Paul was mentioning earlier, but also introduce the global complexity of some of the problems and some of the examples that Paul's initially shared with you. So in terms of the global context and why is this potentially not just can't be considered as a European problem, but is a global problem for us to consider. If we take the example of the Glock 17, which Paul has introduced you to, while it might only be manufactured in Austria and in the United States, we can see from the data that's been collected that it's actually featured and found in 57 different countries. And in terms of this as the original factory weapon system, when we think of, in the case of the Glock 17 pistol, we're looking particularly at the frame, which is the polymer manufactured part in particular. In terms of the markings, we're looking at those 3 locations that Paul mentioned. So the metal tag underneath on the underside of the frame, which in this case is ESS 920, which we can clearly see and is quite visible. But then in terms of the polymer itself, we do have some marks, some proof marks, for example, but these are much, much more difficult in that right lower portion, just down here. We also have the made in Austria and Glock markings and information. But if we actually look at the metal, it's much more distinctive, it's much more durable. There's also the potential area for deactivation marks to be added on these metal parts, but these marks may not be present, for example, on the polymer. And so where things to do with the functionality of the weapon may have changed over time, not all of those parts may be marked in that way to indicate the life cycle of that particular factory-made firearm. So we might have some further aspects to consider there regarding the functionality of the weapons and actually what might have happened to those parts over time during their lifespan. We also have those parts that, or the accessories, for example, that may not bear that serial number mark. So, for example, we might have manufacturers that produce and sell parts for their firearms because of the modularity. For example, the SIG Sauer P320. So this is an example of just where the grip itself, if people aren't aware that this is just what we call a grip module, there will be no metal tag containing a serial number on this part. These parts are designed to enable the user to produce things that are very bespoke. They might want to customize them, make it their own. They might want to change its color, change the size of the grip, and therefore the ergonomics of how that firearm is actually utilized. But there are these 2 parts. So this one up here, this is actually the fire control unit. So this is where the actual serial number for this particular component part would be identified. But in the grip module, there's basically a window, an opening in the polymer that then allows for the serial number on the fire control unit to be visualized when that weapon is put together and assembled. And so again, if we're not, if people who are recording aren't aware of the differences in the parts and where these marks may or may not be present, again, that will lead to issues with data quality, recording, and also potential tracing as well. So if you think of a standard tracing operation, we might have a lost, stolen, trafficked, smuggled firearm or firearm part. That typically would start by our investigation by looking at a national registry for those firearms. So with the actual serial number in particular being used to establish whether it's a registered firearm in that country, and who the owner might be. Also, if it's been lost or stolen, somebody might report that to the police. The police would then look to enter that data into Interpol's ION system, their record management system, basically. And they might also request that firearms be traced through alcohol, tobacco, firearms and explosives e-trace system. So some of the challenges here are actually around the fact that some countries are only using IARMS, some countries are only using e-trace, some countries are trying to utilize both, but IARMS isn't always as successful as it could be because of the potential for countries to focus on only using one method or another. And as with any database, the success and the outcome of any trace requests that are initiated by law enforcement are going to be affected by the quality of the data. And if the information isn't in the system, we're not going to be able to trace that life cycle, who owned it, where it was made, etc. over time. So tracing as a mechanism has a really vital role to play, as we've already heard. Tracing can enable us to identify and reveal the point of the firearm or the part's manufacture, the point that it was legally imported into a particular country, the time it was legally purchased, and every time it has been legally purchased, if that is documented and recorded and shared within either a database or between stakeholders. Also the times when that firearm has been legally possessed and the point at which that weapon or part might actually go from illegal possession to the point of illegal diversion. As a result of tracing and the ability for us to trace the firearm life cycle, we can also look at the data holistically. We can establish the actual supply routes for those particular firearms as complete systems or as individual parts that bear those those marks for tracing. We can establish and link suspects to particular firearm crimes through identifying who the legal possessors and the point at which those parts and weapons may have been put into the illegal or the black market. We can identify who the potential traffickers might be and the locations of which that trafficking might occur. We can also look at the data to detect trends, changes in which types of firearm, which systems might be most prevalent for illegal diversion, or might indicate where there's the greater demand for a particular type of weapon, and where those supply routes might be changing over time, potentially due to focuses of law enforcement operation, tightening of security, tightening of legislation, and also implementation of the ITI and other forms of supportive mechanism that aim to reduce trafficking and illicit use of firearms and ammunition. We can also look at using the data to direct the operations and strategy and helping us to future-proof and continue to reduce the impact potentially on the future. So some of the challenges associated with specifically polymer frames, Paul mentioned already the fact that marks in polymer can be very easily removed or obliterated, and metal tags, if they're not securely secure onto the polymer, can also be easily removed. In particular, laser marks and marks in polymers are not very deep. They are quite easy to remove, and you can't then restore those marks for tracing purposes. Likewise, if we look at the actual metals themselves, if we're using relatively surface level methods of making serial numbers in the metal, we also find it virtually impossible to restore and recover those marks. Whereas if we use a deeper, more ingrained, like a stamping process where the metal itself is actually, the crystalline structure is changed, we can actually have a greater potential to restore those marks, because the memory of the metal is much, much deeper, and the criminal has to actually remove a lot more surface in order to prevent us from restoring those marks. So the depth of those marks and the way in which those marks are made is also really important for us to consider. Also, as Paul mentioned earlier, we've got the changes to configuration, and that can be really problematic for law enforcement, not only because you might only have the serial number that you're using for tracing, but by changing the parts, for example, here on the left, we can see that actually the slide and the barrel have two different serial numbers. So the barrel and the frame, for example, they both have our original ESS 920 serial number, which was issued at the original point of the factory sale. But actually, over that firearms life cycle, we've actually got a change in barrel. And this is where a barrel manufactured for a second Glock 17 pistol has actually been replaced and changed into this pistol. So now, are we utilizing both, have we got a database and a method of record keeping and documentation that's documenting both of these on certificates, in our registry systems, in IARMS, eTrace, etc., that allows us to now start to trace and follow the journey of these two parts that have now been utilized in one firearm that has been used to commit a crime, which at some point also bears the activation marks to say that at some point this firearm was rendered not able to fire projectiles, but then at some point later has actually been reactivated so that it can. We've also got, particularly in Europe, but not just restricted to Europe, also in Australia and across other parts of the world, where we've got our replica or imitation firearms, particularly our blank firing guns, airsoft pistols, which are actually being illegally converted to actually fire projectiles and commit murder, attempted murder, and other forms of serious organized crime, where there are no serial mark numbers to initiate tracing, or again, those markings are very limited. The ability to record who's purchased those particular firearms and where the point of illegal conversion has happened is also unknown and difficult to track and trace. We've also got no requirement for serial numbers and marks to be put on legally manufactured standalone parts. So for example, in some parts of the world, so this is particular on aftermarket parts and replacement parts, some of the polymer 80 build kits that are used to assemble firearms, and individual parts, not just the receiver or the frame, for example. And we're also seeing an increase in the trafficking of parts as opposed to complete weapons. And again, this is making tracing more difficult and more challenging where we don't have marks and trace serial numbers being put on these individual parts. There's also a growing issue with some parts of the world, particularly Turkey, for example, generating excellent quality counterfeit parts and counterfeit firearms. These weapons might have very good fictitious, erroneous, or irrelevant markings that are being deliberately placed on them to be misleading. So an example here is the Glock. And in this particular, for those that aren't aware, externally, these marks look genuine, they look factory made, they look identical. But when you actually look at the rifling, for example, in the barrel, it's actually not a polygonal rifling style, which is what Glock produces, but it's actually a conventional rifling approach. So the barrel themselves isn't actually produced by Glock, but it doesn't appear to be that way because of these fictitious and erroneous marks that have been put on the outside. It's not just the case there, but also we've got potential challenges with looking at online sales of particular parts, for example, sound moderators and suppressors, points where during the delivery of these parts, when they're being sold, they're actually sold to multiple points and they get repackaged, and therefore again it makes it very difficult for us to follow the life cycle and the journey of those particular parts and firearms as well. So any of if these marks and traces are not put on the parts or on the firearms, it makes it very, very difficult to complete all of the rest of the tracing process. And there's, you know, a break in that chain and has a big impact on tracing operations. So if we look at the scale of the potential problem where we've got weapons with no markings or altered markings, we're looking at about 15%, and this is potentially old data, but we've seen it relatively stable, but this is seemingly growing anecdotally in recent years. So when without these marks and traces or the ability to restore obliterated marks and serial numbers, for example, it can be virtually impossible to trace firearms life cycle. And this will become more prevalent and more pronounced when you go to webinar 2 looking at craft produced and 3D printed weapons next time. As a result, we'll have limited ability to detect and monitor the changes in the points of manufacture, mechanisms and points of illegal diversion, and monitor and detect changes in trafficking routes. Fundamentally, this then has a massive impact on international cooperation and our ability to make operational and strategic decisions, tackle transnational organized crime, intercept supply routes and seize illegally held firearms, and also prosecute offenders and reduce illicit supply. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a deeper insight into some of the law enforcement challenges. And this is only touching the surface on those. But if you've got any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them if Q&A time allows. Or if you'd like to contact me, please use the QR code to access my details, and we can discuss afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Maybe just to highlight 3 points that you very nicely made in your presentation. So one that I'm taking away is that having no serial number poses really a significant challenge for law enforcement to try and solve crimes committed with a small arm, but also to any state agency that tries to combat the smuggling and the diversion of small arms type weapons, because it really poses a monumental challenge to tracing them. And then second, maybe outlining this, that we are seeing this gray zone. I think if traditionally, and I think that's still one of the core discussions that will be held, is traditionally manufactured small arms with a polymer frame, and there are good approaches how they can be marked. But I think as you've shown, as soon as you start looking into details, there are complexities there that are worth looking at, both on how easy is it to obliterate any such markings, but then also how do we deal with this emerging gray zone area of the market that is not necessarily always illegal, but that also might not be traditionally controlled always. And then finally, I think I'm taking away this endless cat and mouse game that criminals try to avoid capture, including by making it harder for law enforcement and for states to trace weapons, and then states, of course, trying to catch them, but sometimes also facing challenges there that regulatory change is slow at the national level, but also especially so at the international level. With that, I would love to go to our next speaker. And it's my pleasure to hand the floor to Thierry Jacobs, who will take an industry perspective from his long experience working with industry on the challenges in the regulatory good practice on controlling modular small arms components. And with that, Thierry, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Is it my okay. Let's see, take times to open. So first of all, thanks a lot for hosting me. It's a pleasure. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So I have some difficulty to open it in full screen. I don't know why, but it will happen. If not, I will not lose the time. Let me share it in another way.
Perhaps in that case, how about we share the presentation on our end and you simply tell us to continue?
Yes, it will be easier because it doesn't work like this. I have minor modification, but okay, fine. It's the old one, but it's okay. I will go to next one. So first of all, I just want to repeat what is normally well known by all the attendees of the UN requirement on marking and tracing, coming from firearm protocol, so name of manufacturer, country of place or place of manufacturer, serial number, international tracing instrument request, name of manufacturer, country or place of manufacturing, and the serial number, and if possible, year of manufacture, weapon type, model, and caliber, plus import marking, country of import, and if possible, the year of import. So yes, something, next one, okay. Recent and future or potential development in military small arms and light weapons. We have faced during the last 15-20 years main evolution for military weapons material, but it has been clearly approached by Paul, thanks a lot, and of course architectures, concept, and design. Before going into the detail, I want to underline different things. First of all, interoperability is one of the key requests for the military firearms, not only for modular, but for all firearms, meaning for one model, all different parts must fit on all different firearms that has been by army. So what does it mean? And it's a key concern, of course, is that parts and components are not dedicated to a unique firearms. Some important remarks that a model of parts or kits for a model could be manufactured by different manufacturers. In fact, it's important to say that there are no copyrights on firearms, except for some design of mechanism. But globally speaking, there are no protection. And when you have a protection by a patent, it's for 20 years. It means that regarding the lifetime of the firearms, mostly over 30, 50 years, it's nothing. The global design is also almost impossible to protect. It means that it's sometimes very difficult to clearly identify the manufacturer based just on the model. So just the name can be protected, but it doesn't matter for us. It doesn't help us. So let's go next one. No, next one. This one has been addressed. So until 2005, one model was equal to one caliber, one design, one configuration. And today, as it has been clearly said by Paul, we have two new approaches. The family approach, meaning that one model could be available in different caliber, and you have also the common receiver approach, meaning that one firearms could be used in different caliber and could be adapted on the field. So this is a real challenge, of course, to have an efficient tracing. Yes. Yes, family approach. Yes. Next one. Okay, it has been already shown by Paul, but this is typical family approach. So you have different caliber, different lengths of barrel. You can have different accessories, but globally speaking, it looks like exactly the same. So how to make a difference? And this difference is also not only for tracing, but also, believe me or not, for safety reason, because it's sometimes quite difficult to teach soldiers the difference between the different calibers. So next one. So for the family approach, the main issue is the risk of confusion between the different family members. So it means, as it can be said by Raquel, tracing issue. In fact, it's important to underline, I give the example of my previous company, Effenerstal. We keep record of information of product that has been manufactured by FN since 1889. So since the beginning of the factories in paper form till 1993 and 83, and since 1983 we keep it also on electronic forms. We had about, because I'm now retired, I'm not anymore there, but we had about 300 requests for tracing a year. 90% coming from Justice Department and about 10% coming through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from UN requests. And for the weapons after 93, 100% of the answer were positive. It was okay to answer. It's much more difficult, but we can say that 95% of the requests receive a positive answer for all older firearms. The key concern is the data. We need to receive the right data. Main error is the definition of the weapons, and of course, having a family approach is much more difficult to clearly identify the caliber and also the serial number regarding the logistic number, because a lot of armies and sometimes in big law enforcement agency, they request of having also a logistic number on the receiver. So we have received a lot of requests from tracing without a photo, just having a number saying this is the serial number. No, it was the logistic number, but it's quite difficult sometimes to make the difference between both. So regarding the caliber, because it's important and we make this different, especially since we have this family approach, we had an alphanumeric code at the serial number to more clearly identify the caliber to facilitate the tracing. For example, H mean heavy, 762, L light, 556. Now, of course, we have more and more different caliber in between. We need to be more creative to find other letters such as M for 6.5 and so on. Now, if I go, let's go on to the common receiver approach, and I give a very clear example of machine gun, Mini-Me MK3. So you can buy this one in 762, and if you had a kit, if you buy a kit, 5.6, the kit, what does it mean? This is the barrel assembly, the feed cover with a rear side group, ejectors, cooking handle assembly, slide assembly, bolt assembly, and you change, and you have with this kit the same machine gun, but in 5.6. So how to deal with all this stuff now? Yeah, next one. By definition, that's why it's not the same. Upper receiver is considered as the core component that cannot be changed. That's why we put the serial number, adding the caliber also to improve the tracing efficiency. But how to deal with the kit, of course, regarding interchangeability approach. The barrel must be or could be marked, but for some army, it's considered, and it has been said already also, as a spare part. So it means that you can buy a barrel, not necessary in the original manufacturer, from somebody else, change, and sometimes you don't have a serial number as we had on the previous one. Lower receiver, for me, this is the best way to identify the real caliber. Why? Because first of all, Don't forget that caliber, if you remember the request by the different UN organizations, caliber is not mandatory on the barrel. And sometimes it could be very difficult to clearly identify the real caliber, for example, between, okay, 5.56 and 7.62, yes, if you are an expert, you can find it very easily. But sometimes with a new caliber, such as the 6.5 or 6.8, it's more and more difficult to see the difference. One of the main concerns we have is when the upper receiver is not considered as a key component. And it could be like this. In some country, you can find, for example, upper receiver not considered as a key component, but as an accessory, and they consider the lower receiver as a key one. But meaning that you can assemble a lower receiver without a serial number with an upper receiver without a serial number, because they has not been made by the same manufacturer, and it's a key concern. Something I want to underline, Paul, the case you explained regarding the change of a 762 into a 5.6 is purely theoretical. Why? Because I know I cannot show you, of course, with my you see where the name identification is. This is what we call also that is what we call the magazine well. And of course, the magazine well for a 762 is not a magazine well for a 5.56, meaning that if you put an upper receiver of 5.56 on a lower receiver in 762, you will be not able to introduce a magazine 5.56 inside the magazine well. And at my best acknowledge, but maybe I make a mistake, it doesn't exist a universal magazine for both caliber or for different caliber. It's impossible, I believe, from a pure technical point of view, but who knows? So regarding next one, please. When in case of machine gun command receiver, we don't have the same concern because we use linked ammunition, we don't use magazines, so we don't have a magazine well, so it's totally different. We use the same receiver for both calibers, so it's much more easier to put the serial number, the name of the manufacturer, the country of manufacturing on the receiver, and it's okay. Now with the kit, due to the interchangeable approach, how to deal with that. So we have, as I said, the barrel assembly, the feed cover, ejector, cooking handle, slide assembly, bolt assembly. The only visible part for the caliber identification is the barrel. That's why it's important to put also the caliber on the barrel. And we put it also on feed cover, but this is much for safety reason. So adding other serial number on the other parts will increase, of course, the risk of confusion, because due to the interoperability approach, and it has been clearly said by Raquel also, you can find a bolt with a serial number placed in a slide with another one, and so on. And this is a real challenge, quite difficult to solve. So, next one. I have two recommendations because, of course, as kit and other component could be manufactured by other manufacturer than the original one, and as the same model could be also produced after a certain period by other manufacturer, it is important that it is up to the original manufacturer to indicate which part of the split receiver as the core component, and should be thus be considered like this by everyone. But is it feasible? Quite difficult, of course. And the second recommendation I have to prevent the confusion, yes, next one. To prevent the confusion with other marks put on other component coming later from another manufacturer, or kits that has been acquired later or sometime from another manufacturer, it is strongly recommended to indicate the modular nature of the weapons. To this end, the core component chosen by the original manufacturer should be additionally marked with a sign, for example, 1, that clearly indicate that this is the mark that must be used for the tracing. This is the original mark. And for no core parts, such as another barrel, could be marked with another sign, 2, for example, that say this is not the original one. And for tracing, you need to use a serial number with a 1 before. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I've been open for questions if you have. Thanks a lot.
Thierry, thanks so much for the presentation, and I hope that helps participants make it clear what is modular small arm, what are the challenges, but also that there are good and effective practices from industry to address that. Now, the last days, I've spent a lot of time looking at various websites selling small arms parts. I'm still waiting for the UN to knock at my door and wonder what the heck I'm up to. But so I do know that, for instance, for the CM901, which I think natively chambers 7.62 millimeter ammunition, you can find an adapter that allows it to use a magazine of 5.56 millimeter ammunition with a change in the upper receiver. So probably depends on what kind of rifle you have. So I think that then really depends on it. Although Thierry,
I'm not surprised it exists, because people have a lot of imagination when they need to develop something that is not necessarily not illegal, but not also legal. But globally speaking, it's not made for this normally.
Yes, certainly that. I think it would have cost me something like $165 US on that particular website. Then I doubt they would have shipped it to Switzerland, where I'm located. But so I think just to flag that problem exists. And if I use the FN SCAR that you had in your examples, as far as I could see online, it's used by governments in 28 countries these days across Asia, the Americas, Europe, and to a very limited degree in Africa. And so modular small arms designs are successful for reasons that you have outlined. And while I think traditionally has been portrayed as a European trend, the issue that also Rachel outlined with this mix and match approach, we see much more and more globally. So talking about how do we make sure that law enforcement agencies find the right serial number, that you don't have cases where you can simply get a lower receiver that's unmarked from one place, an upper receiver that is unmarked from a different manufacturer, match them, have a ghost gun, I think are issues that are very worthwhile to discuss. But now I'm abusing my moderator's privilege because it's time to hand the floor to Denise Jacquemart to discuss the practical recommendations that the open-ended technical expert group could consider to tackle these issues. Denise, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rubin. I will try to share my screen. There you go. Sorry. And it seems that I have the same problem as Thierry. Come on. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much to UNIDIR for organizing the seminar. I will go quickly on the first slides because I think you are now all experts on modular frames and also on polymer frames and also on modular weapons. So of course, you know, the use of materials has changed, and of course this poses a problem for the marking, especially for the durability of the marking. As Thierry has mentioned, we are of course here to in the preview to the OETEG that will take place next year in the framework of the PoA, the program of action on small arms weapons. But some states are also state parties to the UN Firearm Protocol, so of course they have to apply both sets of rules. If we check, of course, the marking requirements from the Firearm Protocol and the international tracing instrument, we speak about durable marking and, if possible, recoverable marking, which is very difficult on polymer frame weapons. But there are also solutions already being implemented by the industry, and that has already been covered by the previous speaker, so I will not spend too much time. but just we still have some questions regarding those methods. For example, the metal tag that is inserted. As was mentioned before, of course, we need to make sure that this metal tag cannot be removed without damaging the weapon. But also, for example, what's the length of the metal tag that should be inserted by the manufacturer? For example, for countries that practice import marking, how could they put marking that is durable if the metal tag is already full? So maybe we should leave some space. I mean, there's all small technical things that we should maybe discuss and decide during this OETEG, or at least take some recommendation that will be decided upon later. And of course, thanks to Thierry and Poa, you also had an extensive briefing on the issue of modular weapons. Just to go back to the requirement from the Florence Protocol and the International Tracing Instrument, this unique marking we speak about should be placed on an essential or structural component. And of course, we need to be able to identify which of the component is the essential component containing this unique marking that would allow the tracing to happen at the later stage. Just for example, the issue we should try to find some common ground is the information that the marking should contain. Thierry mentioned the caliber, also for safety reason, just to make sure that the user does not insert the wrong ammunition in the firearm, which could create a firing incident, for example. We need a common understanding of what the essential component is, and Thierry already mentioned some solutions that could come to let the original manufacturer decide what the essential component is, and then this decision could be, for example, communicated to the UN, have it in some sort of public database, and then the producers that would produce the weapon under license at a later stage would have to respect that decision. There is also in the OETEG that will come later the issue of 3D printed firearms, but you will have a specific webinar, I think the second one on 3D printed firearms, so I will leave that for now. This issue of what we call new technologies, when they are not so new, in the UN PoA is not really a new one. This issue was raised already by some countries at the BMS4 in 2010. It was acknowledged in the report of BMS 5 and 6. There were 2 meetings of governmental experts dedicated to the issue in 2011 and 2015, but without clear recommendations, or at least without decisions on what we should do about those type of weapons. The issue was again discussed at the RevCon4 in 2018, and the RevCon4 also decided to request a report by the UN Secretary General on some recommendation on polymer frame and modular weapons. And since 2019, resolutions at the UN General Assembly in First Commission recall every year the need to address this issue in a timely manner. So we already have very good language in the report of the UN Secretary General of 2019, and this report considered the idea of having an annex to the ITI, so to kind of update the ITI with an annex specifically for the questions regarding polymer frame and modular weapons. We tried to have a discussion about this annex at the BMS7 in 2021. It was a difficult BMS because it was during COVID, so it had been postponed. And some delegation expressed the idea that they didn't have enough technical expertise to actually being able to take a decision on this idea of an annex to the ITI, and therefore the idea of an OETEG, Open-Ended Technical Expert Group, was raised. Belgium proposed a mandate for this group during BMS 8. It was only for discussion. There was no time really for decision. And then the decision was taken at the RevCon4 last year. So we will have 2 sessions of the OETEG in 2026 and 2028. What do we expect from the OETEG? And I speak here, of course, from the Belgian perspective. We really would like a discussion on technical issues, because it's going to be very short. It's 2 to 3 days. We have a lot of topics to cover. And so from our perspective, we should really focus on very basic questions, like, for example, what is the length of the metal tag that we should insert? How can we mark durably on polymer? What is the essential component, and how can we decide about it? Can we keep this designation of the essential components? These are very, very practical questions that we would like to address. And we also would like to keep the principles of the PoA and the ITI relevant. So I know there are also new technologies for marking, like for example, the micro markings, the QR codes, and things like that. But in our point of view, these are complementary methods, but we should keep the simple method of having one serial number that can be read easily. So there is no need for specific instrument to read the serial number. So that's low tech, that's simple, should be durable, of course, so it should stand the test of time, and it should be very clear, meaning we should be able to see exactly what is the serial number that could be used for tracing. That should be directly clear which serial number we should use, because of course Thierry mentioned also the issue with logistical markings or import markings. So basically, what we would like the OETEG to provide also guidelines to the industry. I mean, the industry really wants to do things well in general, but they need to have answers to make sure that what they do is actually in conformity with the principles of the ITI, the PoA, and the FIAM protocol. So we also would like the industry to be involved in the OETEG, because they have, of course, a very valuable input to provide on what is technically possible on markings. We also would like to have input for organizations that actually are involved in tracing operations. So you probably know conflict and memory research very well, that do post-conflict tracing. The input, of course, of Interpol and other organizations is very important, of organizations actually doing tracing or providing the structures to do tracing. There is always, of course, when we speak about new technologies, we always insist on challenge and opportunities. Challenges, that's this webinar is all about. There are also benefits, of course, of new technologies, but those will be touched upon, I think, in a third webinar from UNIDIR. And one last thing is there is a window of opportunity now until 2030, but we already see some regional standards that are being decided. So if we cannot agree on a universal agreement, then it's going to be, I think, a missed opportunity for the international community, because we will see some regional standards from the US, from the EU, from other regions. And of course, that's it should be, of course, better if we can decide about it in the UN framework altogether. On just further information, so Belgium published a working paper for the RevCon4 in 2018. So that's a 15-page, rather technical paper. It focuses on modular and polymer firearms, not 3D printed firearms that was added later as an issue to tackle in the OETEG. You have the report of the UN Secretary General that I already mentioned, that contains already very good language on what an annex to the ITI could look like. And then Belgium published another paper, which is a bit more, we would say, easier to read for the BMS 8. And finally, I invite you, of course, to go read the mandate of the OETEG, which is in the final report of the other RevCon4. That will be it for me. Of course, I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I think you very nicely show that, that while the problems then that we face with marking, record keeping, tracing are quite complicated, the solutions didn't necessarily need to be so complicated, and that good practice already exists. So we're definitely not starting at scratch. And I believe you also show how there's a clear benefit to act at the international level. Practice at the current supersedes, is in danger of superseding and outpacing the program of action ITI on these issues. And so the OETEG is an opportunity to strengthen the role of the PoA and the ITI as the main international normative framework on these issues. And I think as Rachel clearly outlined, there would be very real benefits for law enforcement efforts, as well as any other efforts to tackle the illicit trade in small arms light weapons if we can strengthen marking and tracing.